Go find another table, my mother said, not looking up from her plate as I stood there, frozen in disbelief. The words hung in the air like a cruel joke, but there was nothing funny about it. I had always known that being adopted meant I was different, but I never thought it would feel so sharp, so cold. I had spent my life trying to earn my place in this family, but tonight, in front of everyone, it became clear that I would never truly belong. My name was Sarah, and this was supposed to be a family dinner, a celebration of togetherness, but instead, I was left standing in the middle of the room, questioning everything. I had come home from work early to join them, excited for the meal, the laughter, the stories we would share. But instead, my heart sank as I felt the weight of rejection. Mom, my adoptive mother, looked at me as if I were an inconvenience, a problem she'd rather not deal with. No one said a word after her statement. The room fell into an eerie silence, as though I wasn't even there. I wanted to argue, to yell, to demand an explanation, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I did the only thing I could do. I smiled, a smile that barely reached my eyes, masking the pain that threatened to surface. I turned and walked toward the other side of the room, my mind racing. I had always known there was a gap between us, but this was different. This wasn't just distance. It was rejection, plain and simple. As I sat down at the small table in the corner, my mind replayed her words, over and over. Go find another table. The more I thought about it, the more my chest tightened. Was this how she really felt about me? How could she say that? John, my stepfather, didn't even look up from his newspaper. And Emma, my younger sister, pretended to be busy with her phone, avoiding any kind of eye contact. The whole family was in on it, and it made me feel like I had no place here, no purpose. The dinner continued around me, but I could barely hear the clinking of silverware or the murmur of conversation. It was all muffled, distant, as if I were watching the scene. From behind glass, I felt like a ghost, invisible to the people who should have cared about me the most. Why did this hurt so much? I had spent my entire life trying to fit in, to earn my place, but now I realized it would never happen. I wasn't part of the family, not really. I was just a stranger in their house. And yet, somehow, I had convinced myself that if I just worked hard enough, showed them enough love, they would see me as one of their own. But tonight, with those simple, cutting words, Mom shattered that illusion. The weight of rejection was suffocating. I could feel the tears welling up, but I refused to let them fall. Instead, I forced myself to focus on the food in front of me, trying to keep my composure, trying to act like everything was fine, even though my world was crumbling around me. I had to admit it to myself, I was never going to be enough for them. And that thought, that crushing realization, was almost more than I could bear. I sat there, at the small table in the corner, my heart heavy with a weight I hadn't known I could carry. I couldn't help but think about the words my mother had just said, how they cut through the air like a blade. Go find another table. My stomach churned as I stared at my half-eaten dinner. The food tasted bland, and I barely had the appetite to finish it. Every bite felt like a reminder that I was alone, even though I was sitting at the table with them. I had always known that being adopted meant I was different, but tonight, for the first time, I felt the full force of that difference. It wasn't just a feeling anymore, it was real. It was palpable, and it hurt in ways I couldn't explain. The family continued with their dinner, chatting about their day, laughing at some inside joke I wasn't a part of. The clinking of utensils and the occasional burst of laughter from Emma or John made me feel like I was in a different world. My mind kept racing back to the moment when my mother told me to find another table. How could she say that to me? How could she treat me like I didn't belong here? The thought kept repeating itself like a broken record. I knew she wasn't fond of me, but I always thought that over time, things would get better. That somehow, I would find my place in this family. But now, everything seemed to crumble away before my eyes. I stole a glance at Emma, sitting across the table with her phone, eyes glued to the screen. Her silence was just as telling as the others' laughter. She didn't look at me, not even once. It wasn't just that I was adopted. It was that I was a burden, an inconvenience they didn't want to deal with. I had always known there was tension, that I wasn't their real child, but I had convinced myself that love and effort would bridge the gap. But now, I realized it wasn't enough. I had never been enough. I took a deep breath and tried to steady myself, but the hurt was growing too fast. I felt trapped in this suffocating reality. John didn't even glance my way. I had always tried to please him, tried to fit in with his easygoing attitude, but tonight, it was clear he didn't see me as anything more than an outsider. I felt like a ghost in my own home, invisible to the people who should have cared about me. I swallowed the lump in my throat and stood up slowly, grabbing my plate and walking to the kitchen. I needed to escape, even if it was just for a moment. As I rinsed my plate under the sink, I looked out the window, watching the dark sky stretch out before me. The quiet outside was almost peaceful compared to the chaos inside my head. But then, a thought struck me. What if this was it? What if I had always been the outsider, the one they tolerated but never truly accepted? My hands gripped the edges of the sink, and I fought to keep the tears at bay. The silence in the house was overwhelming. It felt as though the walls were closing in on me, pushing me further away from everything I had hoped for. I turned back toward the dining room, where they were still laughing and talking, oblivious to my pain. And in that moment, I knew I had to make a choice. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. I had to stand up for myself. I had to stop letting them treat me like I didn't matter. I had spent my whole life trying to earn their approval, but I could see now that it would never come. I was never going to be the daughter they wanted, and that was something I had to accept. The next few days were filled with a heavy silence that was almost unbearable. Sarah couldn't escape the image of her mother's words, "Go find another table," and the cruel way they had been delivered. Each time she walked past her mother or John, she felt like she was walking through a fog. They acted as though nothing had happened, like everything was normal. But it wasn't. Sarah wasn't sure what hurt more, the words themselves or the indifference with which they were said. She couldn't bring herself to ask anyone about it, not even Emma. The silence between them was deafening. It was as if the family had decided that she no longer belonged, and yet, none of them had the decency to say it outright. Every dinner, every small interaction, felt like a reminder that she was the odd one out. She began to wonder how much longer she could stay in this house, in this family that seemed to have forgotten she existed. The days passed slowly, and Sarah began to retreat further into herself. She spent hours in her room, staring at the walls, trying to figure out where everything went wrong. She thought back to her childhood, the way Martha had promised her that she was part of the family, that she would always be loved. It was hard to reconcile that promise with the woman who had told her to go find another table. Sarah couldn't stop herself from remembering the little moments. When John had taught her how to ride a bike, when Martha had braided her hair for the first time. It had felt like love, real love. But now, looking at them, all she could feel was emptiness. There was no affection, no connection. It was as if all of it had been a lie, a carefully constructed illusion that had fallen apart. She wanted to confront Martha, to demand an explanation, but each time she tried, the words caught in her throat. She was terrified of what she might hear, of what the truth might reveal. Maybe Martha had always felt this way about her, but had hidden it behind the facade of love and acceptance. Maybe the love Sarah thought she had was nothing more than a facade too. One night, after another cold dinner where she had been ignored, Sarah walked into the kitchen, determined to finally face the truth. Martha was sitting at the table, sipping her coffee. Sarah stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say. Martha didn't look up. Sarah swallowed hard and spoke, her voice shaking. "Why did you say that to me? At dinner? Why did you make me feel like I didn't belong?" For a long moment, there was only silence. Finally, Martha put her cup down and looked up at Sarah. There was no warmth in her gaze, no hint of apology. "You've never really belonged here, Sarah," she said flatly. "You were always different. I thought you understood that." The words hit Sarah like a slap in the face. She could barely breathe, barely think. The reality of it all, Martha's indifference, her coldness, was more than Sarah could bear. She had always wanted to believe that family meant something, that love could conquer everything. But Martha had shattered that belief in one simple sentence. Sarah didn't know what to say. The pain was too much. "I've tried, Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I've tried so hard to fit in." But Martha just looked at her, her expression unreadable. "It's not about trying, Sarah. It's about what's real. You'll never be one of us. You need to accept that." The finality in her voice left no room for argument, no space for the hope Sarah had clung to for so long. She turned and walked away, her heart heavy with the weight of the truth she had just heard. She didn't know what to do now. Her world felt like it had shattered into 1,000 pieces, and she had no idea how to pick them up. I could hear the sound of the clock ticking in the background, a constant reminder of the time slipping away. The weight of Martha's words still hung over Sarah, lingering in her mind like a cloud that wouldn't dissipate. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Martha's face, cold and indifferent. She had hoped, for years, that things would get better, that one day, she would be able to prove herself, to earn the love she had longed for. But now, that hope felt like a distant memory, a cruel illusion she had clung to for far too long. The next morning, Sarah went through the motions. She got up, made coffee, and tried to eat breakfast, but the food had no taste. She felt like a stranger in her own home, surrounded by people who had never truly accepted her. John passed her in the hallway without even acknowledging her, and Emma stayed in her room, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts. She couldn't escape the feeling of being completely and utterly alone. It was as if her entire life had been a lie. For years, she had tried to fit in, to earn the place she thought she deserved in the family, but all her efforts had been for nothing. She wasn't their real daughter, and no matter how hard she tried, she would never be. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. She wasn't sure how long she sat there, staring at the empty coffee cup in front of her. The silence in the house was deafening, and for the first time, she wondered if she had ever truly belonged here. Martha had made it clear that Sarah wasn't part of the family, that she was nothing more than an outsider. But what hurt the most was the way Martha had said it, so matter-of-factly, as if it was something Sarah should have already known. It wasn't just the rejection that stung, it was the coldness, the finality in Martha's voice. Sarah had always believed that love could fix anything, that with enough patience and kindness, she could earn the acceptance she had always longed for. But now, she understood that no amount of love would ever change the way they saw her. She was adopted. She was different. And that difference would always set her apart. As the days passed, Sarah withdrew further into herself. She spent more time alone, retreating into her room, not sure of how to move forward. Every time she walked past the dining room, she saw Martha, John, and Emma sitting together, talking and laughing, and she felt a pang in her chest. She wasn't part of that. She wasn't part of their family, not really. And as much as it hurt, she knew it was time to face the truth. She couldn't keep pretending anymore. She had tried so hard for so long to fit into a place that was never meant for her. And now, she had to accept it. It was time to move on, to find a new path, even if it meant leaving everything behind. I spent the next few days in a haze, the weight of my thoughts pressing down on me like a constant storm cloud. Every time I tried to shake the feeling, it came back stronger, more suffocating. The truth was undeniable now. I didn't belong. I wasn't part of their world, not in any real sense. As much as I had hoped, as much as I had tried, Martha had made it clear that I was just an outsider in their family. The rejection stung, but strangely, it also brought a sense of clarity. I wasn't going to get the love or acceptance I had dreamed of. It was time to stop pretending. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of resolve. For the first time in days, I wasn't overwhelmed by sadness or anger. I was just tired. Tired of trying to make something work that never would. I had spent so many years bending over backward to be part of a family that never truly saw me. Martha's words had shattered the illusion, but it was also a wake-up call. I couldn't keep trying to force myself into a place where I wasn't wanted. So, I packed my things. The decision felt surreal, but I knew it was the right one. It wasn't like I was leaving anything behind that mattered, at least not anymore. The house felt empty, even with the sound of footsteps echoing through it. As I moved from room to room, gathering my things, I couldn't help but notice how much of the space had once felt like home. I had spent so many years here, trying to make it work, trying to carve out a place for myself. But now, it felt like a prison, a place I had to escape from before it consumed me completely. As I walked past the dining room, I caught a glimpse of Martha and John sitting at the table, their conversation quiet, just the two of them. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness. But then it passed. They had never really been my family, not in the way I had always wanted them to be. I had been fooling myself for far too long. The decision was made. I was leaving. And this time, it wasn't about trying to fix things. It was about walking away from a situation that could never change. I grabbed my bag and headed for the door, the finality of it all sinking in. As I stepped out into the cool air, I took a deep breath, feeling the weight on my chest lift just a little. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay here any longer. I had to find a place for myself, somewhere I could finally be free from the pain of constantly feeling unwanted. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I felt a small spark of hope. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let them define me anymore. I left the house without looking back, the door closing behind me with a soft click. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. The weight that had settled in my chest for so long seemed to lighten as I stepped into the fresh air, the cool breeze brushing against my face. It was as if, with every step away from that house, I was shedding a layer of the pain I had carried with me for years. I didn't have a plan, no map to guide me, but for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a sense of freedom. I walked down the street, my steps purposeful, though the path ahead remained unclear. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just an escape. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I ignored it. I didn't want to hear from Martha or anyone else. For too long, I had let their expectations and their indifference define me. Now, it was time to decide who I was on my own terms. The world outside was different from the house I had left behind. The sky seemed wider, the air fresher, and though there were moments when doubt crept in, I knew I was doing the right thing. I found myself standing in front of a small cafe, its windows fogged from the warmth inside. I hadn't realized how hungry I was until the smell of fresh coffee and baked goods hit me. I walked in, greeted by the friendly hum of voices and the clinking of coffee cups. It was simple, a small moment of peace in the middle of a storm. I ordered a coffee and sat at a table by the window, the warm cup in my hands grounding me in the moment. As I sat there, I began to realize something. I wasn't just running from the family I had known. I was running towards something. I didn't know what that was yet, but I could feel it stirring inside me. A desire for something more. A desire to live life on my own terms, without the weight of rejection holding me back. The more I thought about it, the more I understood. Leaving wasn't just about escaping the pain. It was about reclaiming myself, finding my own way, and learning to trust that I could make a new life for myself. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need to fit into their mold. I was capable of making my own choices, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control. As I finished my coffee, I stood up, ready to face the unknown. I didn't know where this path would lead, but I knew I had to keep moving forward. With each step I took, I was leaving behind the version of myself that had been shaped by others. I was becoming something new. And that, I realized, was the most freeing feeling of all. I found a small apartment in a quiet part of town. The rent was reasonable, and the landlord was kind enough to offer me a month-to-month lease. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The first night in my new space was strange, the silence overwhelming after so many years of living in the same house, in the same routine. The walls seemed too close, the air too still. But as I sat down on the small couch, I realized something. I was free. There was no one here to tell me where to sit, no one to ignore me or make me feel small. I could breathe again. I had my own space, my own time, and for the first time in years, I didn't have to worry about fitting in. The days that followed were a blur. I spent most of my time organizing the apartment, trying to make it feel like home. I unpacked boxes, set up my kitchen, and rearranged the furniture until everything felt just right. The process was oddly therapeutic, a way for me to take control of my life again. I was finally able to make decisions for myself, to create my own environment. Every small task felt like a victory, a step toward reclaiming my sense of self. One evening, as I sat on the couch with a cup of tea, I felt a sense of calm that I hadn't known in years. The tension that had constantly been in the back of my mind, the anxiety of trying to live up to others' expectations, was gone. I could finally let go of the pressure to be someone I wasn't. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to just exist, to be myself, without worrying about what anyone else thought. The next day, I went out for a walk around the neighborhood. The streets were quiet, lined with trees that had just started to change color for the fall. It was peaceful. As I walked, I realized how much I had missed these simple moments. In the past, I had been so focused on trying to please Martha and John and fit into their version of what a family should be, that I had forgotten how to enjoy my own life. Now, I had the space to remember. I stopped at a small park and sat on one of the benches, watching the children play in the distance. I smiled, feeling a sense of contentment that I hadn't known before. I wasn't bound by anyone's expectations anymore. I was free to be who I wanted to be. And as the sun began to set, I realized that this was just the beginning. There was a whole world out there waiting for me. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to embrace it. I didn't know where to begin. The freedom was both exhilarating and terrifying. I had been living in this small apartment for a week now, and while the space was mine, there was still a sense of emptiness I couldn't shake. I had always dreamed of a life where I didn't have to answer to anyone, where I could just be myself, but now that I had it, I realized it wasn't as easy as I had imagined. I woke up every morning to an empty apartment, and the silence, while once comforting, now felt like an endless reminder of everything I had left behind. I missed the idea of family, the warmth of having people around, even if that warmth had been tainted with rejection. I knew I couldn't go back, but there were moments when I felt a deep longing for something I would never get. I began to wonder if I was making a mistake, if I had been too hasty in cutting ties. Maybe, just maybe, Martha had been right. Maybe I wasn't meant to be a part of that family. These thoughts plagued me, but then I remembered the words I had spoken to myself before leaving. I couldn't keep living for them. I had to live for me. I decided to take a step, one small step outside of my comfort zone. I joined a local yoga class, something I had always wanted to try but never had the courage to do. It was a small act, but it was mine. I wasn't doing it for anyone else, just for me. The first class was awkward. I felt out of place, like everyone else had been practicing for years, and I was the only one who didn't know what they were doing. But something shifted during that hour. As I focused on my breath and the movements, I realized I wasn't just trying to fit in. I was trying to heal. I wasn't doing it for Martha or John. I was doing it for myself. I left the class feeling lighter, more at peace. It wasn't a solution to everything, but it was a start. I had to remember that healing wasn't going to be immediate. It was going to take time. And maybe, just maybe, I didn't need to be whole to start living again. I didn't need to have everything figured out right away. I just needed to take the next step, no matter how small it seemed. The world outside was still waiting for me, full of possibilities, and this time, I wasn't afraid to take it one step at a time. I spent the next few weeks focusing on myself. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments when the weight of the past crept up on me. The loneliness that once felt so suffocating now had a different texture. It was still there, but it wasn't overwhelming anymore. I had learned how to fill the silence, to make it my own. I began working on small projects around the apartment, things I had always wanted to do but never had the chance to. I started learning how to cook, something I had never really enjoyed before, but now, it felt like a form of self-care. Each new recipe was an opportunity to create something, to build something with my own hands. It wasn't just about making food. It was about learning to take care of myself in ways I hadn't known how before. One afternoon, as I was chopping vegetables for a stir-fry, the phone rang. I glanced at the screen and saw Emma's name. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't heard from her since I left. I wasn't sure if I was ready to talk to her, but part of me felt like it was time to face the conversation. I answered the call, trying to steady my breath. "Hey, Sarah." Emma's voice sounded softer than I expected. "I've been thinking a lot about you." I didn't know how to respond. The last time we had spoken, she had barely acknowledged me, and now, it felt like she was trying to make amends. I'm sorry, Sarah," she continued, her voice tinged with guilt. "I know things have been rough, and I didn't know how to handle everything. I should have been there for you." I felt a knot tighten in my chest. It wasn't the apology I had hoped for, but it was something. It was a start. "It's okay," I said quietly, more to myself than to her. I needed to figure things out on my own. We talked for a while longer, and though it wasn't the perfect reconciliation, it felt like a small step in the right direction. After the call, I sat down at the kitchen table, letting out a long breath. It wasn't that I had forgiven her, or even Martha, but I realized that I didn't need their approval to be happy. I didn't need their validation to move forward with my life. I was learning how to be content on my own. The next few months were filled with little victories. I found a new job that I enjoyed, and though it wasn't glamorous, it gave me the independence I had longed for. I made new friends, started volunteering at a local shelter, and, little by little, I started building the life I had always wanted. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. One day, as I walked down the street, a warm breeze blowing through my hair, I realized that I had come a long way. The loneliness still lingered at times, but it didn't control me anymore. I had learned how to embrace the silence, how to fill my own space, and for the first time, I felt free. I had found my own way, and I was proud of that. I woke up early one Saturday morning, the sunlight creeping through the curtains. The apartment was still and quiet, a stark contrast to the noise that used to fill the house. I had settled into a rhythm, a pace that felt right, and while the days sometimes felt long, I had come to appreciate the solitude. For the first time in a while, I wasn't afraid of being alone. I had learned how to fill the space with my own thoughts, my own presence. The isolation that had once suffocated me now felt like an invitation to truly discover who I was, without the constant pressure to meet anyone else's expectations. I had spent so much of my life trying to fit into a mold that wasn't meant for me. Now, for the first time, I was learning to live authentically. I had my job, which I enjoyed, and while it wasn't glamorous, it was mine. It provided me with a sense of stability I hadn't realized I needed. It wasn't just about the paycheck. It was about feeling like I had purpose again. I had also made new connections. They weren't the same as family, but they were real, and they were mine. I had learned that family didn't always mean blood. It could mean the people who choose to stand by you, who support you when the world feels like it's falling apart. One evening, I received a call from Emma. It had been months since we last spoke, and I was surprised to hear from her. Her voice was tentative, almost unsure. "Sarah," she began, "I've been thinking about everything. About what happened. I know it's been a while, but I wanted to check in. I hope you're doing okay." I felt my heart tighten. It wasn't the apology I had hoped for, but it was something. And in that moment, I realized that I didn't need to hold on to the pain anymore. I had spent so much time waiting for them to fix things, for them to acknowledge how much I had given, how much I had sacrificed. But that wasn't going to happen. And I didn't need it to. I didn't need their validation. I had built my own life, my own peace, and that was enough. "I'm doing okay, Emma," I said, my voice steady. "I've been focusing on myself, and I'm finally in a good place." There was silence on the other end of the line, but I could hear the sincerity in her voice when she responded. "I'm glad to hear that, Sarah. I really am." We talked for a little while longer, but the conversation wasn't as heavy as it had been before. It was lighter, filled with small talk and shared memories that weren't tainted by the past. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, but it was a step forward, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had the closure I needed. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about how far I had come. I wasn't the person I had been when I first walked out the door. I had learned so much about myself in such a short amount of time. I had learned that I didn't need anyone's approval to be happy. I didn't need to be perfect. I just needed to be me. And that was enough. I woke up to the soft rays of the morning sun filtering through the blinds, casting warm stripes across the room. It had been several months since I moved into my new life, and the apartment felt like home now. I had filled it with things that made me smile: a cozy couch, colorful throw pillows, a few plants that were still alive, despite my lack of a green thumb. The silence no longer felt suffocating. Instead, it was peaceful, comfortable. As I sat down with a cup of coffee, I couldn't help but think back to how things had been. There were still moments of doubt, but they were fewer now. The pain of rejection from Martha and the family still lingered, but it didn't control me anymore. I was learning to live with it, to move forward, even when the past seemed like it would pull me back. I had gotten used to the idea that I wouldn't have the kind of family I had always imagined. But something had shifted inside of me. I had stopped waiting for their approval. I had stopped wishing for the kind of love that they could never give. I was finally learning to love myself. I had started working on my own terms, on my own timeline. I got a promotion at work, a small step forward, but it felt big. It was a recognition of my abilities, not tied to anyone's expectations, but my own. I was proud of the work I had done to get there. My days were full, but they were full in a way that was meaningful to me. I volunteered at the shelter, spending time with people who appreciated my presence, who valued what I could offer. I built friendships with people who didn't need me to be anything other than myself. I was learning to accept the love I had been withholding from myself for so long. The phone rang one afternoon while I was making dinner. I glanced at the screen. It was Emma. My heart skipped a beat, but I answered anyway. "Hey, Sarah," she said, her voice steady but warm. I've been thinking a lot about you lately. I paused, unsure of what to expect. After everything that had happened, I didn't know if I was ready for another difficult conversation, but there was something about her tone that made me listen. I know I haven't been the best, but I've been doing some thinking, she continued. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for the way everything went down. I should have been there for you. I'm sorry I wasn't. I didn't know how to respond. The words she had spoken, the apology, were exactly what I had needed to hear all along. But now, I wasn't sure if it was too late. A part of me still wanted to believe that there was some way we could fix what had been broken, but I also realized that I had healed in my own way, without needing their validation. It's okay, Emma, I said finally, my voice calm. I've learned to take care of myself, and I've found peace. I'm okay now. She was quiet for a moment. I'm glad to hear that, Sarah. I really am. There was a sincerity in her voice that made me believe her. We didn't talk much longer, but it was enough. The weight of the past few months, the doubt, the uncertainty, it all started to fade. I had come to realize that reconciliation wasn't always about going back to how things were. Sometimes, it was about accepting that things had changed, and that was okay. I had moved on. And now, I could see that the future was full of possibilities, not bound by the chains of the past, but shaped by the choices I made going forward. As I hung up the phone, I felt a sense of finality, not in a sad way, but in a way that felt like I was truly ready to begin again. I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't looking for permission. I was living for myself, and that was enough. I sat in the small cafe, the warm aroma of coffee filling the air, and I realized how far I had come. It had been almost a year since I left the house, since I walked away from everything I thought I knew. Looking back, it felt surreal. The Sarah who had once desperately tried to fit into a family that didn't want her seemed like a different person. Now, I was someone who had learned how to live on her own, how to find peace within herself, even when the world around her was in turmoil. I smiled softly to myself, a quiet recognition of how much had changed. The weight that once pressed down on me, the constant yearning for approval, had faded into the background. It didn't control me anymore. I wasn't waiting for anyone to validate my worth. I had discovered that my worth was something only I could define. It wasn't easy. There were still days when loneliness crept in, when I wondered if I had made the right choice. But those moments were fewer now, and they didn't have the same power over me. I had built something of my own, something that didn't rely on the approval of Martha, John, or anyone else. It was mine. I had found strength in the solitude I had once feared. In the stillness, I had learned how to listen to my own thoughts, to process the pain of the past without letting it overwhelm me. I was no longer trapped by my past or by the expectations of others. I had discovered a new sense of freedom, a sense of possibility that I hadn't known existed. I no longer needed to cling to the idea of family in the way I once had. Yes, I still missed the connections, the warmth, the sense of belonging. But I had realized that family didn't always have to be blood. Sometimes, family was the people who saw you for who you really were, who accepted you without judgment. I wasn't sure where my life was heading, but for the first time in a long time, I was excited about it. I had learned to embrace the unknown, to step forward without fear of what might come. I had chosen to live for myself, and that decision had made all the difference. The phone rang, and I saw Emma's name flash on the screen. I hesitated for a moment before answering. It had been a while since we had last talked, and I wondered what this conversation would bring. Hey, Sarah. Her voice was warm, but there was an edge of uncertainty to it. I've been thinking about you. I hope you're doing well. I felt a flutter of unease. Was this another apology? Or just small talk? But when I spoke, I realized my voice was steady, calm. I'm doing really well, Emma. I've been keeping busy, focusing on the things that matter to me. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, then Emma spoke again. I'm really happy to hear that. I know things have been difficult between us, and I just want you to know that I'm here, if you ever want to talk. I didn't know how to respond at first. Part of me wanted to reconnect, to go back to the way things were before everything fell apart. But I also knew that I couldn't go back. The person I had become in the past year was stronger, more independent. I didn't need the past to define me anymore. I appreciate that, Emma, I said slowly. But I found my own path now. I'm learning to be okay on my own. There was a silence, but this time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was understanding. I get it, Emma replied softly. I really do. We talked for a few more minutes, but the conversation wasn't heavy. There was no pressure, no need for anything more than a simple acknowledgement of where we were. It was a new kind of peace, one that I had never expected to find with her, but now that I had, it felt right. As I hung up, I felt a sense of closure, not because everything was perfect, but because I had accepted that things didn't need to be. I didn't need to force anything anymore. I was finally at peace with myself, with my decisions. And that was all I needed. I woke up early the next day, the sunlight already streaming through the blinds. I had come to appreciate the mornings, the quiet moments when I could gather my thoughts and start the day without the weight of anyone else's expectations pressing down on me. It had been a few months since that phone call with Emma, and while I still felt a slight ache whenever I thought of the family I had left behind, the sharp edges of the pain had dulled. I had learned to fill the empty spaces in my life with things that brought me joy. Simple things, like the sound of the kettle boiling in the morning, the aroma of coffee brewing, or the feel of a good book in my hands. It was a different kind of peace than I had ever known. The previous year felt like a distant memory now, a time when I was constantly questioning myself, trying to fit into a place that wasn't meant for me. But now, I was content with where I was. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. I had my job, which I enjoyed, and I had found a rhythm in my daily life. The apartment, once just a space I had filled out of necessity, had become my sanctuary. It was my space, my home, and I loved it. I had started to make more of an effort to connect with people, but in a way that was healthy for me. I joined a book club, something I'd always wanted to do, but had never made time for. It was a small group, and while I didn't expect to make deep connections, I found that I enjoyed the quiet companionship. It was refreshing to meet people who shared the same interests, who didn't know my past, but accepted me for who I was now. It was in those quiet moments, those small interactions, that I realized how far I had come. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. A few weeks later, I received another message from Emma. It was brief, just a simple, "How are you doing?" But something about it felt different than the first time. I sat with it for a while, unsure of how to respond. I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't ready to jump back into a relationship with her or anyone else in the family. I had built a life where I didn't need to rely on them, and that felt like a victory. After some thought, I typed a simple reply. "I'm doing well, thanks for asking." It was honest, and it was enough. I realized that I didn't need to fix everything with the people in my past. I didn't need to force a relationship that wasn't meant to be. I had learned that healing didn't mean going back. It meant moving forward. And that was exactly what I was doing. The phone buzzed again, and this time, it was John. I hadn't spoken to him since I left, and I had no idea what he wanted. I almost didn't pick up, but something made me do it. "Sarah," his voice sounded tired, almost apologetic. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. I'm sorry for how things turned out. I should have done more." I didn't know how to respond at first. Part of me wanted to say something, to make him understand the hurt I had carried for so long. But I had nothing left to give. "I've moved on, John," I said calmly. "I've found peace, and that's all I need." There was a pause on the other end of the line before he spoke again. "I understand," he said softly. "Take care, Sarah." And that was it. No more words, no more apologies. Just silence, and the weight that had once felt so heavy lifted completely. I hung up the phone and sat there, a quiet sense of finality settling over me. I didn't need to fix everything. I didn't need to go back. I was finally free. I woke up to the sound of the rain tapping against the window, the soft rhythm calming me in a way I hadn't anticipated. It was early, and the world outside was still dim, wrapped in the quiet of a Sunday morning. I had come to appreciate these moments of solitude, these brief pauses in time that allowed me to think, to reflect, and to be present in the life I was now building for myself. I had come so far since leaving that house, since stepping into the unknown and finding my own way. The path hadn't always been easy, but it had been mine to walk. I had learned to trust myself in ways I hadn't before, to believe that I was capable of more than just surviving. I was living, and it felt like a victory. Over the past few months, I had become more connected to the life I was creating. My job had given me a sense of purpose, not just because of the work I did, but because of the independence it brought. It was mine, not shaped by anyone else's expectations, and that made all the difference. The relationships I was building, small as they were, felt real and meaningful. I had learned that family wasn't just about blood. It was about the people who chose to be there, who offered support and care without strings attached. And that was enough. The phone rang as I sat down to sip my coffee, and for a moment, I hesitated. It was a number I didn't recognize, but something inside me told me to pick it up. "Hello," I said, not sure what to expect. There was a pause on the other end of the line before a familiar voice spoke. "Sarah?" It was Martha. I froze. It had been a long time since I heard her voice, and I wasn't sure how I was supposed to feel. A part of me had prepared for this moment, but another part of me was still unsure. "Yes," I answered, my voice steady. "It's me. I know it's been a while, and I don't know if you'll even want to talk to me, but I wanted to reach out," she said, her tone quieter. Then I remembered. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, about the way things went. I know I hurt you, and I'm sorry. I should have treated you better." The words hit me harder than I thought they would. For so long, I had waited for this moment, this apology. But now that it was here, I wasn't sure what to do with it. "It's been a long time, Martha," I said, the weight of everything we had been through hanging between us. "And I've changed. I've moved on. I can't go back to what was." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing, but she didn't say anything for a while. And then, finally, she spoke again. "I understand," she said, her voice breaking slightly. I hope you know that I do regret it. I regret everything that happened." I let out a deep breath, feeling the tension slowly slip away. "I've learned a lot over the past year, Martha," I said softly. "And I've learned that I don't need to carry that weight anymore. I've found peace in my own way. I'm okay." The conversation ended shortly after that, neither of us knowing exactly what to say. But as I hung up the phone, I realized that the closure I had been seeking for so long had come, not in the form of an apology, but in the form of acceptance. I had learned to let go. I had learned to find peace on my own. And that was enough. I stood in front of the mirror that morning, looking at the reflection of someone I didn't quite recognize. The past year had changed me in ways I hadn't expected. I wasn't the same person who had walked out of that house, trying to find herself in a world that had never fully accepted her. No, I had learned how to be someone else, someone stronger, more confident, and, most importantly, someone who wasn't afraid to let go of what held her back. The phone sat on the counter, silent but beckoning. It had been a few weeks since Martha and I had spoken, and though the conversation had been filled with apologies and regrets, something still lingered. I had forgiven her, but I hadn't forgotten. I didn't think I ever would. That was a part of me. Now, the girl who had tried so hard to be loved, to fit into a family that wasn't hers, to be enough for people who could never give her what she needed. I had spent years chasing approval, bending to their whims, sacrificing pieces of myself just to feel like I belonged. But now I saw things clearly. I didn't need them anymore. My life was mine to shape, to mold, to make what I wanted of it. And I wasn't going to waste another minute on people who didn't see me for who I was. The realization hit me like a wave. I had spent so much time waiting for someone to come along and fix things for me. But I didn't need anyone to fix anything. I had done it myself. The past wasn't a chain anymore. It was just a story, a chapter that had closed. It wasn't a burden, it was a lesson. I was free. I looked at my phone again. I hadn't deleted their numbers. I wasn't ready to completely cut ties, but I had no desire to reconnect with the past. Instead, I turned my attention back to the life I was building. I spent the day at the park, walking around and letting my thoughts wander. It wasn't about forgetting anymore. It was about remembering, but without the weight. I smiled as I sat on a bench, the wind blowing through my hair, the sun warm on my face. I was okay. I had done more than just survive. I had thrived. I had made a life that was truly mine. And now, I had the space to fill it with everything I wanted. No one else could define me. Not Martha, not John, not anyone. It was my turn to choose, my turn to live for me. And as I sat there, watching the world go by, I felt a deep sense of peace. I wasn't looking for validation anymore. I wasn't looking for anyone to give me permission to be happy. I was already there.